You want it to be your login, so. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Because I'm fine for it to be me if I got to run back and forth. Testing. I'm plugged in.
Good evening, everybody. Being 7 o'clock and having a quorum, we welcome you to the Monday, July 8th regular meeting of the City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission. Can we get roll call, please?
Yes. Audette Baumann. Chambers. Curtis.
Here.
DeCenzo.
Here.
Milliken.
Here.
Patelko.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Swan. And Tolber.
Here.
Thank you. Swan did notify us they would not be in attendance shortly before the meeting.
Great. Thank you very much. In our packets, we received an agenda for the meeting tonight. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there's no changes.
All right. Hearing that, can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Curtis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Patelko. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Great. We also received minutes from the June 6th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Were there any questions or comments, edits? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
A motion by DeCenzo. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Curtis. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Any communications or announcements?
There were communications, and they were all provided via email, and there's printed copies at the dais.
Wonderful.
No other communications or news.
Okay. Then we will move on to our public hearing. As a reminder to everyone, we have a public hearing tonight. So we will hear from staff, and then we will hear from the applicant, and then we'll open the public hearing. Anyone in attendance will have 3 minutes to come up to the podium. We'll ask that you sign your name and then give your name and address and present your comments. And then we'll hear from everybody here. And then because this is a live streamed event, we'll give an opportunity for the people who are watching online to provide their comments during the public hearing portion. That phone number, as a reminder, is 888-382-9556. So if you call in during this period to give comments on the public hearing item, we will hear those comments then. If you want to give comments on non-agenda items, there will be a place later on in the agenda, both for those here in attendance as well as those watching online to provide their comments at that time. So having said all that, we will open up public hearing
2024.08.
2024.08 to consider rezoning on behalf of Friendship Village to amend the Friendship Village PUD at 1400 and 1402 Drake Road on the western 1,440 feet of 4300 Beach Avenue. Can we hear from staff?
Thank you, Chair Milliken, and apologies for not including the number. It was something I caught preparing today, so I was a little ready for that one. The request you have in front of you, the language was, I used the rezoning language. It still is a PUD. It's proposed to still be a PUD, and I'll give a little bit of background on what a PUD is, a planned unit development. So in this case, there, as referenced in the staff report, there is an approved PUD. It's largely been developed per the PUD, and probably some of the structure is a little bit bigger, the main facility where the full-term care is, because there's an administrative level of expansion you can do in a PUD. So if you look at the plan and go, why is that there, that little extra on the building? That would be why. So the changes proposed in the future exceed that administrative approval. So to change the PUD, it requires the Planning Commission and City Commission to weigh on and make a decision on it. And then obviously the packet includes the level of detail here. But first, what is a planned unit development? Taking the language right out of the zoning ordinance, a planned unit development is a zoning district for a specific project or development which aims for a greater public benefit not typically achieved by typical zoning standards. And as you can see through the staff report, not only is there the PUD history here, there's a history of zoning ordinances, which just a little bit, I dip my toes into that. Even how these were approved back in the 70s was in a very different code. So the way I try to describe simply what a PUD is, I call it almost for lack of a better term, a standalone zoning ordinance. Imagine when Friendship Village seeks to develop the zoning staff, a lot of the material is going to be on that PUD plan as opposed to the zoning code. So that's kind of the broad idea of what a PUD is for the Planning Commission or anyone listening. I'm going to spend a big chunk, at least maybe not a big chunk, half of this giving the history, because I think the history helps inform what is proposed in front of you. And looking at these layers of approval, some developments that came to be and some didn't come to be, it's an interesting background in the land use of this part of the city. So in 1972, the original PUD for Friendship Village was approved. It had a very, it was like nursing care home PUD at the time. And that was for the building, for the nursing care home and independent living, largely the same use, but a much smaller scale. And that original plan exists, shows the building, the entrance. And then by 1975, there's an amendment that's picked up in the city commission records. I did not find a plan for it, but from what I could gather it was probably to some field adjustment, so then the PUD plan was approved. In 1981, somewhat related, there to the north on the 4300 Beach parcel, a development called the West Winds PUD was approved, which was a single-family home subdivision. A portion of it, phase one, was developed off of Grand Prairie and exists today. That's where that turnaround is in the Garden Homes subdivision. In 1997, by that point, Friendship Village had obtained the 1402 North Drake parcel, and their PUD was contained on the 1400 Drake parcel. And there had been developments, they only made it to paper, of extended single-family houses there. So they wanted to amend the PUD then, absorb that property, and propose the 1997 plan. And in 1997, that went to the Planning Commission and City Commission. And you could see there's a little bit of detail left to be wanted on that PUD plan, but that was the plan that was approved. And so that was 1400 and 1402 Drake. We have the current Friendship Village PUD. That's what's in front of us to get amended. Well, related, we have a little bit of an overlap, which I will touch base on. Friendship Village, by 2007, had obtained 4300 Beach, which is where the Garden Homes are. It's 50 units and 25 duplexes. So that original PUD was for all single-family houses, more units. The ordinance at that time permitted them to amend it. Since it was less intensive, it only went to Planning Commission. Planning Commission approved that PUD, went to site plan, got site plan approval, and then was developed. A little bit of a nuance with that one was the site plan was approved in 2007. They probably finished the last unit out there in the last couple of years, so there was a big lull during the recession there. And then by 2013, the last site plan was found for the Friendship Village campus. I think it was for related to the pool. So there was additional parking, a little bit bigger of a building, and that was the last thing looked at out there. And there's been nothing to trigger site plan or rezoning since then. And then 2024, Friendship Village reached out to contact us. They had determined they probably needed to amend their PUD, and then we started the conversations in this application process. All right, so I'm going to start with the aerials here. Any questions at that point before I go on? Okay, so in the vast majority of what we work with in planning and zoning Kalamazoo is parcel lines. The issue here is we have PUD lines which don't match current parcel lines, which is fine. What's proposed, staff believes there's a good chance to make a really clear point of the record at this. So that was part of a lot of the work dealing with the applicant or working with the applicant was to piece together what's on the plan, what's on the record, and with this overlap, what are you proposing to do? So here's the parcel lines, and the notice, because we don't have the PUD lines, we did the notices for the 3 parcels. And this overlap I'm talking about right here is the green is the 1997 PUD plan that's approved for Friendship Village, and the pink up there is the garden homes, the 2007 duplexes. And at the time when they did the garden homes with the Planning Commission and everything, part of the approval was recognizing that the northern 225 feet from that parcel went into the garden homes PUD. So essentially, the way that it is proposed today, we have the layout as it is on the books today, and as developed, it was developed per the garden homes PUD. And so here is what is proposed. The amendment would make that line really clear. And then the overlap is, which I will touch on, doesn't exactly line up with the protected buffer. And then with the buffer, looking at the stormwater needs of the future development, I will touch base on that. How that, a lot of the history tells a story for what's going on there. So there's the 2 layouts. And from there, here is the current zoning. And in some ways, you can see everything blue behind the hatching is PUD zones. But underneath all of that are 3 different PUD plans, which themselves were made up of former plans and some plans never developed. So we're still talking about an area that was known to be a PUD, was developed as a PUD, and largely seems to have been between market and land acquisitions, people working within the scopes of their PUD over these years, building this complicated history. And here's the current land use. Keep in mind these are commercial classifications, so the Friendship Village is highlighted as commercial per taxes, but obviously a little more than a single-family residential, so that makes sense. And then the 1402 is rightfully shown as vacant. There's a little bit of a driveway on there that crosses over from the loop road, but as it stands today, that parcel is largely vacant. And lastly, here is the future land use map. The light, or the yellow is R1 residential. That would be the lowest intensity residential. And the orange there is R3, which is the future land use for the most intensive residential uses. And just for additional reference, this is in the packet as well. This is the 1997 PUD plan, and it's what we have. And there are some things developed here which, between the building or there was a parking lot. That parking lot shows up on aerials back in 2002, seems to be maintenance or staff parking. So it's recognized there were some things beyond the administrative approvals, but when I'm seeing it over 20 years ago, how, why, here we are today. And then for reference, here is a simplified version of the garden homes PUD. It's a little bit faded out in the bottom there, but that's where the clubhouse was. That clubhouse was built about 3 or 4 years ago now. So that PUD as well is built out. And the applicant, and this is in the staff report as well, I thought they did a fantastic job showing these layers. And something I did not touch in those, is, at least in this presentation, is that Drake parcels are NFP, so they're within the Natural Feature Protection Ordinance. Up there in the square hatches, that's the piece that was cut off by that 225-foot change for the garden homes. And lastly, dark gray all the way to the right there, or to the east, is shown the 132-foot buffer in a simplified version. And in working with the applicant of how to develop, what's your density, what's your setbacks, what's NFP, what is your base zone district, using all of this information, staff informed them that unless you combine the parcels, your NFP lines are static. The underlying zone district is considered RM15. Hence, they built their table off of the RM15 standards. That's a simplified version of how all of that was put together. And one more here is just, this was a document I found from, I think the site plan for the garden homes just shows the whole thing in a good view of what was approved and mostly developed, or a portion mostly of what was developed. And then that gets us lastly to here. This is the PUD plan proposed. And before I go into some details of this, I wanted to stop there if there's any questions on that background or history.
One question, you showed the current and future land use. In the current, it's shown as commercial, and the new, it's residential. Is there a reason for that change, or is there any change to the use of the land proposed that would warrant that?
I would call it by zoning, the land use is residential and full care home, so a full care nursing facility. So by zoning and land use, that's what it's considered. The land use that the city uses for that across multiple departments is based off of assessor classification. So what I think we're seeing there is it's not a commercial zoning, it's as the assessor classifies it. So
okay,
probably because of the nursing facility care, all that, it puts that into it. So, and it is definitely more intensive than a residential use, hence the PUD. So
that change in
sense,
land use wouldn't have an effect on the way it is considered under the zoning code in any way?
Correct.
Okay.
I think, at least for zoning, 95% of the time those match up, but we have a PUD, which isn't even a typical zoning classification. And
I have some questions about the NFP, but is that going to be addressed further later? Or?
I will talk about that in my summary of staff recommendation.
Okay, I'll save it.
I have a question about when the city commission approved the garden homes PUD. Was there any discussion about the overlap, or that just they weren't aware of it?
Great question. They were not aware of it because it did not go to city commission, because at the time in 2007, in the zoning ordinance at that time, because it was less intensive than the original PUD approval, the zoning code, I believe, only required it to go to planning commission.
Oh, okay. And
No such provision exists today, but I caught that in my background, and then it was in the zoning code. Since it was already a PUD and less intensive, it didn't, by the code, have to go to commission.
Okay.
And I don't know how it didn't get caught in that process, but it didn't show up on the plans.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So with that, I will give a brief overview of the PUD and what is presented to change. On the diagram you see in front of you, the gray is meant to be existing buildings, and the white are proposed future. And similarly with the paving, the darker gray is proposed to remain the same, and the light gray is what's proposed to change. And so the changes are the large building, I called it the central building. I believe Friendship Village they probably have a name for it. I apologize for not getting that. But for that building, what is proposed are some demolitions and reconstructions. So for the density of the care home, for example, they measured the number of beds. We don't have a measurement of beds anymore, but I asked them to include it to help match what was approved before, to help us understand the density, the parking, and all of that. So that's been provided. So within that main building, you see removals and reconstructions, and on there they put the number of units and the floors. So in a sense, that building would be not in a sense it would be getting bigger, but it would still be the same uses, probably reconstructed for the needs of the business or how they seek to expand. And then the newer units, the new buildings completely, the most prominent part of this project is the independent living there in the northeast corner there, that backwards C building to the right. That's currently on the 1402 parcel. Unfortunately, I can't read the number off it, but there's the number of units, multi-story, underground parking with parking in front of it. And the little hatch you see around it is in some early conversations with city staff. They're seeking with that is, that could serve as a pedestrian path or an amenity for the residents, but it's designed as such where it's wide enough and can support a fire truck. So the details of how they achieve that, but they wanted to be able to show that, as it goes further to the east, that they're aware of the fire concerns, but also, the screening and the buffer. So that's how that was shown. And then on the road there, up on the 4300 beach parcel, you see 2 new duplexes. That would be 4 additional residential units. And then at the southern end, you see some new garages. And the last big change is if you've driven in there, there's a little bit awkward number of turns to get back to the garden homes. So that perimeter road that encircles the building, some of those multiple turns you have are smoothed out. It's meant to make more of a ring road. And in staff's conversations with the fire department, the current layout doesn't create any issues, and so they thought that this would just be an improvement upon that. So that was something taken care of there. So that's the large view of it, and while that PUD boundary does go over 3 parcels, the dimensional standards for the RM15 zone district, the setbacks and all of that are based off of the PUD. And even going kind of into the details, probably from my site plan work, we did evaluate, well, if you move lot lines, here's the impacts. And however that shakes out, it doesn't seem to impact this. It won't impact this plan. And an item that was put in front of you guys tonight was the zoom in here. The PUD plan I just showed you is the exact same plan that's in the packet. And what you have here is a zoom in of it. The copy that was placed on everybody's spot this morning was my last day working. I noticed that there was a miscalculation under the residential, or the number of beds. So the 1 per 5 beds, there was a miscalculation on that, and then they updated the number. So the number that showed up in the original calculation was 142 needed for the beds. They only need 28 for the beds. However, that changes their parking over calculation. But when I wrote the staff report, it wasn't based off of the old number. It was based off of this number. So since I put the old plan in the packet in front of you is the same one with the developer statement, acknowledging that change in their parking calculation was off. So once I notified them, I got that updated plan very quickly. So that was a nuance I wanted to point out. And lastly, before I go over the decision criteria, I took some photos of the site when I was out there 2 weeks ago. This is in the southwest corner. Drake Road is on your left. You can see the sidewalk. You can see the buildings over there to the right. This photo here is back by the community building in the Garden Home subdivision. The left side is pretty much about the northern end of that 132-foot buffer strip. So that's the part that was approved in the Garden Homes PUD. You see that low-lying area, that's where some of their stormwater flows to infiltrate. And back there, you're probably seeing a little bit of trees, probably on the road in the yards, but also as you get towards the neighbors there. This is a photograph. Looking to the left there is the backyards of the houses on Hampton, and I'm pretty much at that boundary between the PUDs looking south. And it's a mix of, open like that, where it goes further away, and I only got so far from that direction because then it just got completely wooded. And so there's the photos, the background, and the decision criteria in the staff report is the decision criteria. So the PUD as approved in 97 is approved per that ordinance and that plan. Moving forward, if this plan was approved, it would be based off of the current zoning code and PUD standards. And some of these PUD standards are the same ones that existed in Appendix A because the process for approval is still in Appendix A in Chapter 8. And then Chapter 50 is where the overlay was put. So the decisions of criteria are from Chapter 8 and from Chapter 50. And I'll go over those. So for the first phase, the PUD itself is in 2 phases. And I went over the full scope. Phase 2 is undetermined for when it'll start. They know they'll do it after Phase 1. And Phase 1 is expected to start in October 25 and would include the demolition of the existing maintenance building, guard shack, and the freestanding garages. New construction of a single-story skilled nursing addition to include 40 units and 48 beds. And those are existing relocated skilled nursing licensed beds already. New construction of a single-story freestanding maintenance building. New construction of a single-story multiple stall parking garage. A new 3-story 80-unit independent living building. That's the building to the right there. And I just mentioned the maintenance building, which is shown as white as well, near the clubhouse for the Garden Homes clubhouse. And then remodel existing a few spaces in the rehab building, remodel the main town center commons area to incorporate new dining venues, revisions to the campus loop, and additional parking. And then new construction of site improvements such as additional sidewalks, landscaping, and outdoor amenities, and new surface parking areas. So a lot of the work shown would be in that Phase 1. And then Phase 2 seems to be more focused on the main building and the duplexes after those phases are done. And that would be demolition of the existing 3-story independent living wing, a loss of 60 units. Demolition of a single-story skilled nursing wing, loss of 28 units and 41 beds. And then the new construction on there of 2 3-story independent living additions. So that would then lead to 110, units within there for residents. Remodel the main kitchen and the main tower of the common center. New construction of 2 additional single-story multi-stall parking garages. There's more of those garages. And new construction of the site improvements shown on the plan that weren't done. So at the end, the work represents a total of 76 additional dwelling units and 19 more beds than the PUD. And you can kind of see in that second phase, we have some single-story demolitions and 3-story replacements, and it sounds like a lot of modernization and internal work going on with the building. So to get to those findings, so the role of the Planning Commission is to ensure that a PUD is consistent with the zoning ordinance standards, and those shall the consistency with the city master plan, that the development can be conveniently, efficiently, economically served by the existing utilities and services, of design flexibility that results in a greater public benefit than could be used by conventional zoning regulations, preservation of environmental and historic resources, and a mix of attractive and functional residential and non-residential developments that are compatible with the surrounding development. So the staff review standards of approval are, number 1, a comparison of the proposed development parameters with the standards of the underlying zoning district and the otherwise applicable standards of this ordinance with the justification for deviation from the underlying or otherwise applicable standards. So as I mentioned, RM15 was the base zone, and a portion of this PUD based off of parcel lines are within the natural feature protection ordinance. With the NFP, the staff liaison to the NFP, there was a NFP background or assessment information provided, and I went over this application and the NFP with the NFP liaison. So the way this works, instead of the NFP review would occur, the very detailed review would occur at site plan review for any of these phases. And the features identified on these sites are woodland. They would have to do an assessment for protected trees, but it wouldn't be a difficult thing to provide the protected trees. And protected trees in a woodland are treated differently than a protected tree separate from a woodland. So that's a large way of saying the amount of work here to the NFP standard, it's all well within the parameters. So through the removal of woodland, there's a percentage of woodland you can remove. I think they could remove up to 75% by right. So they're under that. So looking at it, when this does go to site plan review, we're not seeing anything here well out of line. It looks like there's ways to still line up with the zoning in the NFP because we haven't done that deep NFP, and the NFP Review Board would review it at site plan. So that's that little bit of a, there would be more information at site plan, and if there was a protected tree that we don't have in front of us right now, you could remove protected trees by right. So there's nothing here that we see really infringing on the NFP when this does develop in the future. Number two, so I want to go back to that. So besides the NFP, the density here is, they put in the staff report the amount of density that would be allowed by right. So the development has less units than would be allowed by right. They're proposing greater setbacks, and it is largely consistent with the PUD approval on file and approved already. The development is comprehensively planned and integrated, compact, and where possible, linked by pedestrian ways to the surrounding properties. The PUD as it exists reflects a lot of these characteristics already. With the multiple land uses, the larger facility and independent homes, all of them are interconnected not only by the roadways, but by a large winding trail system. And there is a ring road around the larger building and other uses. This PUD amendment seems to build upon those and is in the spirit of the PUD and that interconnected linkage of making sure that these multiple uses are all able to be connected. Number three is the development is compatible with surrounding land uses and maintains and enhances the value of surrounding properties. This PUD has been here for over 50 years, and there are no new uses proposed. However, there is a new building for the independent living to the east with 80 residential units. With the existing buffer and the greater distance through the buffer than would be required by zoning, while it is a multi-80 unit building, it's still a building consistent with what's on the plan, and there's a separation between the deeded space and the space they're leaving behind it for the amenity. So staff doesn't see that the work being proposed either with that building, the duplexes, the maintenance building, or with the main campus itself, that there would be any substantive change to any value of surrounding properties. Number four there is signs. A PUD, an applicant can propose a detailed sign plan to follow. They have chosen not to do that, and then they would be subject to the underlying zone district standards. And I do recall that working with them on their current signage not too long ago, they currently meet those residential standards, and it doesn't sound like there's a need for more signs. Number five, public facilities. And 5 will be broken into a couple of sub-questions. 5A is, the plan demonstrates a safe and adequate on-site circulation system that is integrated with the off-site circulation of the system. Again, that Circle Road, this is being improved. Staff believes that this is an improvement upon it. And while I gather beach there probably was supposed to go longer, there was a traffic impact study provided by the applicant that was given to the traffic engineer. And based off signal timing, increase in capacity, staff doesn't find there's any need to change signals, that this would increase anything, and things work over there pretty well. And that's for its connection to the public road system. And that little bit of beach that comes off of Drake is that public road system. So the beach and Drake is a signalized intersection. There's a bus stop at that intersection, and there's public sidewalk that takes you down Drake to the rest. So that connection to the public roads and ways is existing. They don't propose any changes and isn't broken. Staff believes there's no need to fix it. The PUD plan demonstrates a safe and adequate on-site potable water and waste lines that can accommodate the proposed development, and they're efficiently integrated into off-site potable water and wastewater public improvement plans. We do have a water service reliability letter from the water department, and they've been in communication with the sanitary division, and they believe that there's capacity as well. And then things like the hydrants, any main extensions would be evaluated during site plan review. So the city's confident we can meet that requirement. 5C, C is adequate off-site facilities for potable water, sewage disposal, solid waste, disposable electric supply, fire protection, and roads is planned and programmed for the development proposed in the PUD. The development is conveniently located in relation to schools and police protection services. There are sufficient schools capacity. It's not anticipated that there would be a new load on the schools from the population there, and the police and fire are confident that they can respond to it. And the only one from there we haven't had a response was from the electric utility. I know that the applicant has reached out. We're pretty confident that there is there, but we are waiting to get that final confirmation. 5D, the circulation system is designed to provide safe, convenient access to all areas of the proposed development using the minimum practical roadway length. Access is provided by a public right-of-way, private vehicular or pedestrian way, or a commonly owned easement. Internal pathways are provided to form a logical, safe, and convenient system for pedestrian access to dwelling units and common areas with the appropriate linkages off-site. Again, I think that was covered a little bit in the earlier one. There is the existing trail system. There's very visible public trails. There's the wooded trails. And then you have the connection to the city public network as well, whether by bus, car, or foot. 5E, the circulation system will be provided to provide access to the proposed development using the practical roadway length. Again, they're putting the circle around there, probably reducing it in turns. Staff believes that that's an improvement. Will access be provided by a public right-of-way, private vehicular or pedestrian way, or commonly owned easement? Yes, this is, as mentioned, this is an existing development and there's no proposed changes. You may have noticed some roads, the right-of-ways dead end at some portions of this PUD, but there's no plans on there to show any new connections. And within that deed restriction is a prohibition off of Iroquois Way for construction traffic. So if you can't have construction traffic. So there isn't appear to be any changes on that. Will the 5H is, will roadways be designed to permit access by emergency vehicles to all lots and or units? And again, as mentioned, I've been in contact with the Public Safety Department. They believe they show a plan that demonstrates that, and the existing conditions work really well. So like the roadway width, we're not looking to make it 2 feet or 4 feet wider. 5H, will the principal vehicular access points be provided to provide for a smooth flow of traffic, minimize hazards to vehicular, pedestrian, or bicycle traffic? They will be improved upon, and it is a way to clean up, again, that area at the Beach Street entrance into a common loop. So the new alignment will improve those flows and for all the reasons, whether it's for traffic, the motoring public, or public safety response. Open space, number 6, will a minimum of 35% of the gross land area of the PUD be reserved for common recreation open space? And the answer is yes. The current calculation is 64.7. And within there as well, all of this property is owned by Friendship Village, and through the different PUDs, the maintenance of all of these grounds between the PUDs is all maintained by Friendship Village. Residents can go between each. They've provided a document to recognize that. So while there might be 2 different parcels, it's all the residents of this PUD can access all the amenities of this one or even the Garden Homes one. Natural resources and environmental protection, number 7, will the PUD plan comply with the current regulatory standards of this ordinance and other regulatory city, state, federal regulations as it relates to the natural resources and environmental protection? Yes, an item that I wanted to touch base on this was the basin that they show in that area of the 132-foot buffer. This development has been in place for 50 years, and there's going to be additional roof cover and additional parking. And what that is going to run up into is when it was developed, stormwater standards and codes were very different. So that when they develop now, they're going to have to hold more on site. And then there's also existing sites, when it goes through site plan, there may be a need to keep more on site because some does go to the city system. So recognizing that to achieve those, which are good environmental practice, and for the city's stormwater infrastructure capacity. This is a very high site in the city. The elevation is a few hundred feet higher from where we stand. So thinking of the more that we can retain, those rules are meant to retain and slow the flow. So while there is a planted area there and they would potentially use it for stormwater pond, that's part of the reason why I think the most obvious is, hey, you're going into that buffer. That's at least the most obvious thing there that highlights for environmental. The others are with the NFP information provided. They've dug into the ordinance. We've provided it to our NFP liaison, and the existing landscaping of the site. So they can maintain the site very well. There's plenty of beautiful trees. They create a great environment. And so between being able to comply with the NFP, history of developing properties in the city, compliant with all those development standards, we believe this PUD can not only line up with the current zoning standards of the city, but all necessary regulations and environmental regulations. Phasing, will the PUD plan include a phasing plan for this development? Yes, and the phasing plan is included. They, in the developer statement, items 1 through 10 are phase 1 and the remainder being in phase 2. Consistent with the master plan. Number 9, will the PUD be consistent with the master plan? Yes. Referencing the future land use map, as shown, it was shown as the highest intensity of residential. So by right, this area in the future land use is already eyed per that towards a higher density compared to some of the areas around it. And this PUD plan is, at least to the current RM15 standards, is well below that density. So it's an existing land use. I believe the future land use and those documents in the master plan recognize it. We need all types of housing in the city of Kalamazoo, and this serves a very important need for a lot of our citizens in need. So it's believed that this amendment lines up with the master plan quite well. And number 10, will the PUD plan comply with all other relevant requirements in the ordinance? Staff does believe that this can and will align with all development standards of the ordinance. In the weeks and months preparing for the pre-application and application, there's been a lot of application or a lot of questions and back and forth about when this actually moves forward. And so far, talking to all the city departments, whether it's engineering, public safety, zoning, or natural features, this all looks very possible. So those are all of the standards specified in the ordinance of what the Planning Commission weighs their decision on. So between the background, what's proposed here from the last PUD, staff recommends approval with the condition that the City Commission amend the agreement to permit the stormwater pond as shown on the PUD plan. But we're between the two PUD there. That would be more specifically that the building up there, the backwards C, the independent living building, to the upper right there is where they show the potential stormwater pond. And if there's any questions on that, I know that the applicant's here and will give a presentation as well.
Thank you, Bobby. Any questions for staff at this moment?
One question on the stormwater retention basins. There's 2 different basins that are shown as proposed, one where you point out to the northeast of the new building, and then one to the northwest closer to Beach Avenue.
Yep.
Do you know the phasing for those? Is one supposed to be phase 2, one phase 1, or are those going in at the same time?
I do not. I would let the applicant answer that as well. But from what I know, I would say they would be put in as needed. Probably the logistics of, I don't know where they would need the capacity until phase 2 for the north one. So I don't know, but I imagine that it's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
So I think the one near the independent living building would definitely be included with phase 1. So.
Good. Other questions for staff at this moment?
So this is an area that's already seen a PUD with a phase 2 that wasn't completed, unrelated to this project. And it looks like all of the unit loss is in phase 2. Would that create a problem if phase 2 we don't see phase 3 completed? with density or any issues of that?
That's a good question. I think if phase 2 did not occur, they're still under those numbers, and the building did not change. However, if it was to change, the footprint could impact it, but that plan would just be sitting on a shelf until they moved. So in theory, if Friendship Village didn't do it for 40 years and they did phase 1, they could move forward.
I think I see too that it's counteracted by the additions that would be in phase 2. They sort of counteract each other.
Yeah, and the additions are bigger. They're all single story. They're proposed to be 3 units. And in that event, I think we would view it as if they wanted to not do an addition, but the number of units did not change or exceed what was in the PUD plan, that would be permitted. It's a good question, because those are the guardrails, where if they propose the same number of units, but the building was much bigger, that would trigger an amendment. That would bring it to the commissions.
Other questions for staff at this moment? Just to clarify a couple things, I think you said this, but I think it's an important point to raise again. The buildings or specific development that are proposed here, will they need to go through formal site plan review with all the details associated with that?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially what we're asked to do tonight is review this proposed plan as an amendment to the previously approved plan and ensure its consistency with those standards that you detailed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and make a recommendation to the City Commission on that.
Correct.
Okay.
To further clarify that point, our role tonight in approving or disapproving this change to the PUD, is it specific to this layout? Or is it we're approving X amount of buildings of X amount of size for an increase in this density in any permutation within this PUD as it exists as a sort of like independent zoning entity? Or is it specifically the layout as proposed?
It would be the layout proposed. Obviously, with that administrative approval, I think there's like a 5% building size. So if the building was a little bit bigger, because obviously they don't have the full plans for it. So, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
I was just mostly trying to nail down, because Chair Milliken asked about, if there will be a site plan review. I'm trying to figure out how much of what we're doing here tonight is kind of site plan review-ish.
Yeah. Okay, good question. And that was my struggle in developing this, because I used to do site plan review. No, it is not a site plan level review. I think of it, if this is the zoning ordinance, this is our guide. And we see the 1997 one spared us a lot less details. So on this one, for example, instead of, we have setbacks on the full perimeter shown, we have an open space percentage, we have a building outline, we have a solid parking count, we have a bed count, we have a dwelling unit count. So then the question would be, when they apply for site plan, we would review it to this. So for example, when the independent living building came in, we would ask for the number of units in the PUD as it stands pre and post development. So instead of going to our zoning ordinance sections, at least the zoning review and planning review is done off of this document. And I think this gives all of those guardrails. It definitely is not a site plan level of review, but it gives us that zoning table information where if it's not on there, staff goes, like when I did the sign with Friendship Village a few years ago, did they have a sign plan? Did they not? So we worked with the RM15.
Okay, thank you.
So as a hypothetical, if the reverse C building shifts 2 feet to the north or the east, that's probably something that's administratively okay. But if it ends up on Drake Road, that's not okay and would have to come back through this process.
That is exactly correct.
Does that make sense? Okay. And then my other sort of clarifying question, I think you said this earlier, but I was looking at a previous thing at the time. Is the goal here to sort of reshift these, if we use the PUD1 and PUD2 labels, reshift the boundaries of those so that the western part of PUD2 becomes part of PUD1 and the sort of southwestern part of PUD, of the parcel that PUD 1 sits on becomes part of PUD 2?
That's a good question. The only overlap, that piece, that upper left-hand corner there, that's always been part of PUD 1.
Oh, it has.
When they built PUD 2, the only part on PUD 1 was they put Persianwood Drive in. But you'll see on the 1997 plan, there was an easement there for a road. So to achieve PUD 2, they built a compliant road from PUD 1 on there. But they missed the buffer strip.
Okay, so boundaries are all remaining the same, et
Yeah,
cetera.
and so with that, we now have two overlays. The NFP didn't exist when this created, and this created a little bit of a conflict for staff. So that's where the PUD boundary lines have been respected and used. That's how these were looked at before. So to be consistent with that, we advise them to use the PUD boundary. So we're moving forward. If something happens on either PUD, this puts a spot in the record to clearly show that, and that was a challenge in the research on this one.
Okay. Any other questions?
One other question. I feel like a lot's going to come down to this buffer zone, the 132 foot. Can you go through, maybe you covered this, but I didn't catch it, one more time, where that comes from, and if there's any specific requirements of what that buffer zone has to look like from a vegetation or open space or zoning perspective? What's the background and what goes into that requirement?
Great question. So the full background is, in the 70s, when the original PUD was approved, this buffer was in that middle dash line. It was at the eastern end, no, it was at the western end of 1402, because they anticipated single-family homes. They wanted to create a buffer between the two uses. By 1997, that single-family home development had become a thing of the past, but recognizing the impact on the existing homes, a condition for the 1997 approval was to move that over to the east side, and then that original approval was imposed by the city commission. So it is a deed restriction, but it's also the deed restriction from the city commission. And the language in that is the applicant provided the recorded, it's the resolution from 1997. It calls it a buffer, so it doesn't get too specific. I've shared it with the city attorney. He may be able to provide a little more, but it prevented the construction or access off of Iroquois Way. It was 132 foot wide and moving it. But I did notice in there, at least my review of it, didn't say like shall be trees or all of that. But that being said, the language of that holds. So, and if the northern part isn't cut off, well then that pond would have to be removed from the PUD plan.
Wait, if it's a deed restriction, does it just apply to the 1402 Drake Road parcel?
The deed restriction has a legal description, and Driesinga laid it out, and it does cross.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, that was. So yeah, that part is technically now out of this PUD.
Yeah, following up on that buffer piece, it mentions trees, woodlands, and natural heritage sites, and then it mentions any impacts to the established natural features will be replaced and restored. Have those been identified, or is that a part of this process or a separate process with the NFP?
Repeat the part at the beginning of the
Any
natural. That's
impacts
from
to the
the
established
standards.
natural features will be replaced and restored in accordance with the standards of the Natural Features Protection Review Board.
Yep.
Is that in process, or is that separate from this, or?
It would be separate. So the evaluation, Friendship Village is, they're aware of the MNFI impacts. They've done some groundwork already to start to understand the site, what natural feature impacts in this development. So I know that they're working on it. Now, that natural feature protection review, with every development, with the exception of a PUD, they're usually going to site plan right after. So if it was a variance or a rezoning, but this PUD has development, the NFP review could occur much later. So when any phase goes to site plan review, and all of their future improvements would require site plan review, the Natural Feature Protection Review Committee reviews that site plan as well and gives an NFP approval to it before the site plan is approved and construction starts. So they provided that little background on the background in NFP, and in talking with Nolan Bergstrom in our office, that's where I really rely on him for the science with the trees and the natural features. But everything he said, it's a good site, and they're doing all the right things to understand those criteria.
Okay.
All right. Should we let Bobby sit down?
And if I may, one more thing, the proposed impacts to the features, at least shown on the PUD plan and the scale of a PUD plan, it lines up well with at least the natural feature standards in the zoning and the overlay.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. If we can have the applicant come up, we'll hear about the proposal.
I didn't get the email before, but if you got it. Perfect. Thank you, Bobby.
So I'm Randy Kuzer. I'm with LCS, Life Care Services. So who are they? So you saw from Bobby's presentation that this campus has been around here since 1972. We own and manage life care campuses, and that's all we do. It's all for senior housing. This was the first one we ever managed 50 years ago. We've been managing this campus for 50 years and really proud of it. So I represent the development side of life care services. So when a not-for-profit like this one they have their own board. When they recognize that they have some buildings that are falling into disrepair or they're not keeping up with the market, they would come to us, and we're a developer manager. We also manage on the accounting side and do things for a not-for-profit that they may not be able to afford a lot of HR people and employee insurance plans and things. So we work for not-for-profits all over the country and have some of our own projects that we own and manage. So I just represent the development side, and they came to us to assist them with hiring an architect, a civil engineer, a interior design firm, landscape architect, and who did I miss? Structural MEP. And we just recently put out an RFP and hired a local contractor who's going to be part of the team helping us in pre-construction so that we can decide the most non-disruptive way to do this construction. So after going through Bobby's rather detailed surgery of what's happened all these years, there's more to come. So we do have specialists that do this. I've been in the senior, I started 30 years ago in doing senior housing. So it's one of my specialties too. So what I'm going to do is just present the team. So David is the Associate Executive Director. Not only is David an Associate Director for the whole campus, but his specialty is the healthcare side, the assisted living, the skilled nursing, and the rehab. And I'm really glad there are people like David around to do that. So he's here to talk about how that's managed and what we do for people. And we have Sam, who is the architect we've hired. Sam's company has worked for LCS very successfully in other areas of the country. So he's one of the architects that we've used, and their company has a division that's a senior housing division. So I just wanted to do that brief presentation of what we're all here for.
So good evening, everyone. My name is David Reiser. I'm the Associate Executive Director at Friendship Village of Kalamazoo. I've been with Life Care Services for just over 5 years, and I've been serving at Friendship Village of Kalamazoo for just over 18 months. As Randy said, I oversee both our health center, so 57-bed health center, skilled nursing, as well as our 78 apartment assisted living and memory care. As Randy said, Friendship Village has been around for just about 50 years. We'll be celebrating 50 years here next February of our first residents moving in. We've been partnering and serving the Kalamazoo community for those 50 years through just over 230 apartments for independent living, as well with our assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing. We've got a couple slides to go over here. So just wanted to go over some of the mission statement, vision statement, and values that we abide by at Friendship Village. So, we facilitate vibrant senior living in a life care community to our residents and to our staff as well. We serve our staff just as much as we serve our residents. We also like to have a community where people want to live, work, and visit. And we truly stand by those three words, not just with our residents to live, not just with our staff to work, but for those that visit our community. And lastly, our values. So building relationships through service, compassion, excellence, and friendliness. And those words really are, each word is very important to us in what we do on a daily basis. We're serving a population that's aging. We're serving a population that might not have those that are able to speak for them, both independent living all the way through to skilled nursing. So we believe heavily in that. So a couple of goals with this master plan, really addressing the continued demand for senior housing over the next 15 plus years. We might have heard it before, but the silver tsunami we see with 10,000 individuals turning 65 every year until 2030 and plus. One of the main things to update interior and exterior finishes. So we talked about being in the community for 50 years, right? We've had a lot of great additions. We've done a lot of great things, but we need to look forward for those residents that we will continue to serve, and what does their current space look like? What attracts them to Friendship Village in the greater Kalamazoo area as well? Creating a more cohesive feel across the continuum of care is extremely important. We've got, we're serving just over close to 400 residents throughout the entire community. Bringing those residents together, building that community is extremely important to us. A couple more items. We talked about enhancing the existing site circulation and wayfinding. Continuing to make the community as cohesive as possible, not just for those residents living with us, staff working with us, but also the greater Kalamazoo area. And lastly, we're looking at the outdoor and indoor amenities and additional choices for those seniors, whether they're living here in the Kalamazoo area or looking to potentially relocate to the Kalamazoo area, looking at those spaces as well. Any questions for me? Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sam. I'm with Pope Design Group. Pope Architects, Inc. Is our practicing name in Michigan. We're a Minnesota-based firm, and we do a lot of senior living all across the country. So we're very excited to be here today and present this project to you guys. Bobby did a great job at doing the project overview, so I think my job here is pretty simple here in that I just want to kind of reiterate a few of the main points of why we're doing this project. We touched on a significant need for additional housing for seniors. That's number one. That's not going away either. We touched on the fact that this campus is aging in a certain sense, and so we're trying to bring, state-of-the-art amenities and technologies and things like that into this campus to make it grow and worthwhile and last, the next 15 to 25 years. We touched on the need to address wayfinding across the site, and that's something that's very important for seniors and anyone in the resident or in the community itself. And so we're trying to address both the loop road that we talked about with the vehicular circulation, as well as pedestrian circulation, and making sure there's a sidewalk all the way around the campus so that residents can walk around the campus without having to walk in the road. We're also trying to relocate some of those parking areas to be on the inside of that loop road so that pedestrians aren't crossing over, vehicular pathways in order to get to the places that they need. So we're really trying to make this a better campus and one that will be able to serve more seniors throughout the lifetime of the campus. And also trying to do it in a delicate way where we do anticipate keeping the facility up and running throughout construction. So as Randy mentioned, we'll be working with the contractor to make sure that throughout the entire process, we're ensuring that we're minimizing disruptions to the local campus and the neighboring community as well. So. I think that's what we have for you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Well, all right. I think one of the key things that we're going to have to be talking about this evening is that proposed stormwater pond. And while, as we talked about earlier, we're not doing site plan review, that is a site plan element that is proposed where that 132-foot buffer is, and thus the shift to the buffer as a result of that pond. So can you talk to why the pond needs to be in that location and thus the change to the buffer?
Annie with Drazig and Associates for civil engineering on the project. That location is ideal for, as Bobby mentioned, the independent living at the east. Additionally, with the full build out of the campus, that area isn't going to provide enough stormwater for the full development, so we will need to utilize area at the northwest. Can we go to that slide? Yep. So both basin sizes would be shown as a full build out, and we have done rough stormwater calculations, and we've been working with the city engineer on that. But during phase one, we would not be utilizing the full build out of at least the northwest basin at that point.
And I apologize, I used the word pond, but directly to the north is the existing basin for the clubhouse, and it, at least as I drive by and look at it and look at various aerials, it looks fairly dry and looks like just a landscaped feature that happens to be low. Is that the proposed design for these other basins, at least as you conceptually visualize it now?
Right, yep. Our calculations right now would be they would be dry. Obviously, they would stage up, but they would be designed to be dry retention and or detention basins.
Okay, good, thank you. Helps to visualize a little bit. And then just because it's a little bit different and a little bit new, can you describe or help visualize what underground parking means and what that will look like and feel like, especially to people who may not be living there but be around and looking at it from the outside?
Sure. So right now we're proposing underneath that reverse C-shaped building, there would be underground parking. And so you'll actually notice that there's two different drive lanes entering into each end of that building. So the intent there is to allow enough grade, enough room for that drive so that as you approach the building, you're going down a level. So there'll be some retaining walls on either side of that drive entry so that the majority of the building, 90 to 95% of that building, will be at grade. You won't see that underground parking garage. But from the ends of the building where you access the parking garage, that's where the grade would lower down and you'd enter the underground parking from there. So it's typically, it's parking on both sides, 90-degree parking, intermixed between columns, and we have adequate lighting and safety control measures down there, as well as bicycle parking and other slight amenities or storage areas down there. But the overall intent is that they would be able to bring their car in and have a place that's out of the cold elements, especially in the winter months and things like that. And those things provide a significant risk for seniors in the winter months. So having underground parking where they don't have to worry about those sort of things is definitely something that's convenient and helpful for seniors.
Essentially like the building has a basement.
Yes, it is essentially like a building has a basement. So it wouldn't have any windows or anything like that. It has natural ventilation through mechanical means to allow adequate fresh air intake and air to leave. But it's not like a parking structure that you'd see out in downtown that's open air and open to the sides. It'd be very, the visual impact would be very minimal.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for the applicant?
I want to go back to the retention basin for a second. It was referenced it being an ideal location for the new building to the east. Could you go into why that is ideal, what would make other locations not ideal, and what hardships would be imposed by relocating that basin?
Sure. I'll maybe take a stab at that, and Annie can chime in if needed. But I think one of the big things that we're recognizing is that with underground parking, our piping is lower in the ground. And ideally, we would like to gravity feed the drainage from that area. And so if we look at considering the area to the northwest for stormwater, we'd have significant challenges having to pump water up and then potentially pipe very long distances that end up getting really deep in order to get the water out there. So part of the reason that we identified the northeast location closer to that C-shaped building is because of that proximity. It's closer, and also the elevations of that are more conducive to allowing us to send some stormwater in that location. We're also very limited with open areas on this site. One thing we didn't really touch on is there is a dedicated Village Woods memorial tree area on the southwest portion of the site. That's all memorial trees that have been planted by the community and the residents for loved ones that have been lost over the course of time. We will not touch that area. That's sacred to the campus. And so when when this project first started, we actually had that C-shaped building as multiple smaller buildings. But because of the lack of land available and the desire to kind of condense some of that and minimize the impact on the land, that's why we've started to locate some of the stormwater areas in those spaces. Does that answer your question?
Other questions for the applicant?
I have one. This is sort of a new idea, but that we haven't discussed already, but was there any discussion about connecting with trails to the park to the south? Was that discussed at all?
No, that, to my knowledge, that hasn't been discussed. It's certainly something we'd be willing to explore further if that's desired. I believe I've heard that some residents from neighboring communities come and wander through the trails on site. So I'll let David speak about that, but I think that's a great feature and a nice thing that the campus can provide for the community. So.
Any other questions?
Regarding the public outreach, what was a general theme of the feedback you were receiving, and did you make any amendments to the plan based on feedback?
We had a fairly good turnout for the neighborhood meeting, and a lot of the feedback had to do with the buffer zone on the right-hand side and ensuring that we're being cautious with what we're doing there, and also just clarifying what our intent was there. I think there was a misconception that a lot of those woodland areas or part of the buffer zone would be completely removed. So it was partially a matter of clarification to a lot of the neighborhood residents about what our intent was there. And it seemed like overall the feedback was fairly positive. They understood what we're trying to accomplish. Although I think there is still some concern about change happening in neighbors' backyards. So that is something that we certainly want to listen to the residents about and ensure that we're working with them to meet what they need. I think there were a few different concerns we heard over the night about certain properties or people who live right over there who have some concerns, and we want to do our best to make sure that they're being heard and that we can try and mitigate any issues that they have.
For the screening that you're going to be having over there, do you have an idea of the type of screening or the purpose of the screening? Is it visual or?
The purpose was just to maintain some sort of visual buffer, and we recognize that I think there are some trees in that location currently. I guess in my mind, I visualize that screening as being more natural vegetation. Obviously, I think we're open to ideas and whatever the neighborhood and the city would like us to do, but creating some sort of visual buffer was the intent there, and I think keeping that with natural vegetation and other things would maintain the feel and the theme of that buffer zone. So that's what we'd propose, and maybe that stormwater has to shrink down a little bit more so that we can have enough room for trees. I think it's shown as a pretty minimal dashed line in there, but the intent is to provide a visual buffer.
All right. Anything else? Okay, thank you. If we have anything else, we'll let you know.
Thanks.
Good. All right. With that, we will open up the public hearing. As a reminder, please come forward, state your name and address, and make sure to sign in at the little sign-in sheet up there. If you are watching online, you will have an opportunity after we hear from everybody in the audience to make your comments as well. That phone number, one more time, is 888-382-9556. All right.
We normally start with, I'm not all that familiar with the protocols, but don't we normally start with?
No, anyone can come forward.
Oh, just, okay.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Durkee and Chairperson Greg Milliken in the City Planning Commission. I'm Beth Vanden Homburg, and I live at 1417 Northampton Road. As a follow-up to the letters and the photos I sent earlier in preparation for this meeting, I've brought a couple photo collages. I have a really hard time understanding how these types of behaviors that Friendship Village has engaged in are, by any stretch of the imagination, in alignment with their vision and value statement. The neighbors living along the property line have some significant concerns regarding the quality of life, living in a hostile home environment. It's frankly, it's just appalling. You can see from the pictures here, this is what we came home to in 2021. This was the bulldozer activity in 2020 along the property line. 22, this was my neighbor's tree. She was working from home, and that's what the type of apparatus they needed to remove that limb. You know, this is what they did along that trail. And, I can only imagine what these folks are going to do with that drainage pond and the whole natural features. I have another neighbor who has reached out to you, Julie Risch, and these are the pictures that I've got on the board here with the retaliation that she's experienced from Friendship Village over the years with her concerns. I'd like to hear from the Friendship Village as to how this is appropriate. The second collage focuses on the current views. So for instance, this is the property line, this is what we see. This is the garden condominiums with no buffer, and we would like to have some amendments in this to protect our property lines. So
Thank you very much.
My name is Janet Hay, and I am a resident of Westwood. I live at 908 Stafford Road. I just wanted to comment on my experience at the public meeting that Friendship Village held, the informational section. I felt that the staff was not very forthcoming about all of the details that were about this new expansion project. And it was a little bit conflicting versus like what they had on their posters versus what I was told by the individuals. Particularly around the buffer zone, we were told that, or I was told that it would be left in place. And now when I read the agenda packet, it seems like they're asking for part of it to go away for a basin. So that was very disappointing to find out after the informational session was over. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Good evening. Reverend Lindsay Bell. I live at 4205 Kingsbrook Drive. I was not aware of the public meeting regarding the expansion. However, I did receive a letter regarding this hearing tonight, and so I'm glad that I am here. I was glad to hear that there was a plan to deal with the drainage, because that's why I'm here. Since the garden area was built and developed, I have experienced flooding in my backyard over and over again. I've gone to Friendship Village to talk to them. My wife used to put out all type of decorative things in that backyard area, and only to have all of the mulch and everything floating almost to our back door. I have a couple of pictures here that shows the level of flooding that occurs, and it's been occurring ever since the garden has been put in, those condos back there. And every time there's a heavy, strong rain, my backyard floods. I took the time, I've got a video, to walk around Friendship Village in that back area and talk with those residents that live along the back wall there, or back of the property. And they shared with me that they had concerns as well when they first moved in with flooding, even in their basements. And so I videotaped and followed the line of the water that comes from the property and then goes back into there's a drainage area that cuts over into my backyard. There's a lot of trees. It's just a vacant land, but it shows how it is directed towards the back. And so all of that water rushing comes right into my backyard, and there's I'm not against progress, but not at my expense. I don't want to deteriorate the value of my property by it constantly being flooded, which threatens its own stability. And so I'm not so much concerned about the expansions that they are doing and the drainage ponds that they'll be putting in, but what are you going to currently do regarding the drainage problems that I'm experiencing? And I'll have these pictures available for you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Oh.
Good evening, everyone, and my name's Tony Vanden Homburg, and I live at 1417 Northampton Road in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And basically, what I would like you to consider is an amendment to protect the woodlands along the east property line. So I really don't want to see this three-story building come up and be able to see it from the back of my house. I would like to have trees protecting that area so that I look out my backyard, I don't see this huge building. I also would not like to have a walking trail on the other side of my fence. Currently, there's a mowed path there. On the 4th of July, I was in my backyard trimming some bushes, and a nice lady came along walking on a trail. She was from Friendship Village, and she's very kind and everything, but I would really like to see them not put a trail back there and have a lot of foot traffic there. We've heard from, some Friendship Village staff and surveyors saying that they were going to put some sort of trail in there, so I'd hope they wouldn't do that. That's all I really had to say for tonight. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right. Do we have anyone online?
Let us see. There are no call-in comments this evening.
Okay. Thank you. So seeing that, we will close the public hearing. Any follow-up questions? Anything, commissioners, for staff or for the applicant?
I did have one question for staff. I'll have to find it back in the pamphlet. There was some notes in the applicant's statements about variances from existing ordinances, whether they be zoning or for the specific PUD we're looking at, specifically pertaining to maximum building height, required minimum bicycle parking, and setback. Because those were not addressed in the original presentation, I wanted to hear a little bit of background of what went into, I guess, would those variances be granted by the approval of this modification to the PUD? And if so, what considerations staff made while talking to the applicant about those variances?
That is an excellent question. So a PUD by design permits you to kind of propose what you think you need. So you could propose a 100-story building if it's within that PUD. So for this PUD, that question came up. As they were starting to develop it, the team, hey, we're over your parking standard. Hey, if this building's here, it's going to be less of a setback than the RM15 zone district. Well, the PUD plan is the plan in place, and a PUD can permit beyond what the underlying zone district requires if it's spelled out in the plan. And through the developer statement and the standards of approval, the Y, for example. So their parking ends up being a 38% overage, where the current is you can do up to 10%. Some situations you can do up to 15 or 20% overage. But however, in their explanation, they talk about the guests, the two cars in one unit because the couple each has an automobile, the staff, the existing, the history of how much parking that they need, the amount of open space. So for example, staff sees that 38%, but given that context, it didn't seem to be too much of a variation. So if they were to seek something beyond the PUD plan, they would probably be in a variance territory then, but there was a lot of discussion developing this plan. Since the relief is in the design, you should have what you think you need in there. So I think, you don't have that final building design that the gentleman from Pope was talking about, but within there, they could definitely fit it with that tall of a building. So making sure that the number of stories, the number of units on there was critical. So if they went to develop that building and it was 85 units, hold on, you got to shrink it down. Or if it was 78 units, great, because you're under the maximum permitted. Think of those standards in there as the maximum allowed.
And these standards and the variances or modification thereto was taken into account when providing staff's assessment and recommendations as it respects to the master plan and everything?
Correct. Another one I should point out is the maximum height of the building. The building itself is the height for the residential zones, and it exceeds the maximum height, which is 35 feet. The height is on there. I don't have it right here at the top of my head.
However, 46.
46. So given the analysis of if this was an RM15 by right, a building of 35 feet could be 20 feet back from the rear property line. In this case, there's an existing buffer where the building is going to go. They don't propose removing it behind it. Given it is a variance of, what did you say, 46 or 48? So 11 feet. But given that this situation between 132 foot, the amenity space and the fire lane, this building's already going to be at least 150 feet back, that extra height was consistent with the allowance of additional height permitted through the PUD, and that's what the applicant proposed. So it's a reasonable request in staff's opinion.
And just to reiterate, the 132-foot buffer zone on the east would remain all the way north and south, but the 225-foot buffer to the north would be eliminated in this recommended motion.
With the recommendation provided by staff, then yes, the Planning Commission would be recommending to the City Commission to make that alteration. So, because the deed can't be modified without commission approval, the deed restriction.
Other questions? The I think maybe this is for you, Bobby, or for the attorney, just to kind of help us take a step back. We clarified earlier, and maybe we're rehashing what we talked about previously, but we're looking at we're not doing site plan review. And during the public hearing, we heard a lot of various comments about screening and drainage and good feedback and good comments and things to be taken into account. Some of which, frankly, is an enforcement issue, not really under the purview of our review today. Some of it may be. We're talking about reducing a screening buffer, but there's comments about screening. So maybe, without getting too specific, if either of you don't want to, where do we draw that hazy line?
Good question. I'll offer a response, and if Charlie, you want to add to it, you're welcome to. So for the enforcement issue, I am aware that their city staff, our enforcement staff, have been out there for some of these issues previously, not anything, in the last couple weeks. So we've responded to some of them. And then with the buffer, it creates this unique situation. So by right, if this was a development, there would be a screening requirement, is a screening requirement for the residential immediately to the east. The ones by right, it recognizes there's a 20-foot setback. So that could be a fence, it could be a planted row, or the ordinance does allow for like an existing wood cover, a big, large wood cover. If a property backed up to a 100-foot wide swath, that could serve as it. So this deed, in a way, is serving that almost already without even having to go into the code, because if it's so far back and if without doing site plan review, there's probably more already screening than if this was a new development. So we would still evaluate whatever the screening requirement is. If with the buffer it meets it, great. If there's anything extra required, it would be required with the buffer. So it's there, and it's there wider than what would be required by code already as a buffer, but it doesn't have the exact language, say, of the screening ordinance by landscaping. I may have nailed that one.
Are there any plans for ongoing community outreach or two-way communication where the community can kind of voice these concerns and have them addressed rather than having to go through enforcement? Question for Friendship Village mainly.
Okay, yeah. Do you guys want to address this question?
Could you repeat that just one last time?
Are there any plans for ongoing community outreach, kind of build a two-way communication with the community?
We currently do not have any plans to further that, but we are certainly open to that in any capacity. I think Friendship Village has invested interest in making sure that residents and nearby community members are being heard and trying to address their issues as best that we can. So we would certainly try to work with the community to further that, make sure people are getting heard and we can address that as best we can.
Yeah, Sam did a great job at summarizing that. I would add that not only is this a partnership with future residents, this is a partnership with the Kalamazoo community, the greater community. We know that this impacts not just our residents, future residents, but this impacts the city of Kalamazoo. So we are open and willing and encouraging those conversations.
And at least on the city side, when this does go to the city commission, we do provide there's a public notice for that as well. And then obviously if there's any questions from the citizens for city staff on the application, we're available Monday through Friday.
Jumping back to the discussion around the buffer and the exact definition of that, you brought up the different types of screening that can be provided. To be clear, first of all, is that a requirement within the code? And more to the point, I feel like there would be a lot to be understood about to what extent Friendship Village in the future could remove trees, change the type of screening, remove screening along the buffer zone, not in the northern 225 feet, where I feel like the residents nearby have expressed concerns and frustration with Friendship Village changing the interface between the properties kind of with or without permits, where I think there still needs to be some clarity of what could go on, even if we say this plan as proposed is okay and should go forward. What could happen beyond the scope of that would not require further oversight by this committee or involvement of disputes?
I think the real simple answer is the guardrails are what's in that recorded document. That being said, if it doesn't say a stand of trees at this capacity or this height, then without that clarification in there, we're going to, between the NFP and the screening ordinance, that is, we would work from that in support of what's within the deed restriction. So that being said, if there's anything in a condition related to that, that is certainly at the purview of the Planning Commission to seek those. But I think that's a delicate question, because not only do we have the nuance of the existing codes to line up with natural features, we have this buffer language, which is pretty broad.
Yeah.
However, I will say it's maintained a swath of trees for most of it up until now. So.
And then with it being also part of the natural features protection overlay, is there a stopgap there where there would not be further trees able to be removed without approval for NFP? Or I just want to avoid a situation where Planning Commission approves it, City Commission approves that this plan goes forward with this nice dark green line here drawn in the buffer, and then when it actually goes to construction, all the trees are removed, but the buffer, quote unquote, still exists because there is no construction going on there.
I think some of these questions deserve a deeper dive with the language specific to that agreement. But with that being said, a removal of the trees, anything in there in violation of the deed restriction is its own separate matter, which could be an enforcement issue. Now with NFP, if by NFP they could remove the percentage of trees by right within there from an area calculation, the NFP would permit it, but the deed restriction is still in place, and that would, I think, at least have the more teeth to prevent. Without knowing it, I'm going to guess there's probably some language in there that makes it, if you clear cut everything, that's not a buffer anymore.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, is there a capacity of the Planning Commission in this discussion right now to add or modify or add a condition to the language about the approval of this site plan to guarantee some sort of true buffer, not just in terms of space, but in terms of screening, visual, and natural?
Charlie, would you be able to speak to the limits of their authority to put conditions on that deed restriction?
I would have to review the deed restriction in a little more detail to really comment on it this time.
Yeah, what he said was he would have to read the deed restriction in more detail to comment on that time.
I mean, I would think if we're suggesting an amendment to remove the northern 225 feet, we could probably suggest an amendment to add a sentence or two if we feel that's important.
That sounds like it would be within our purview.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think between whatever decision is made today and a city commission decision, I could get work with Charlie to get this question nailed down a little bit more before it gets to the city commission, and then we could advise on anything at that point.
Other clarifying questions? Okay. Oh, yeah, go for it.
All right, one more. The retention basin to the north, we were talking about that location and being ideal and potential other locations. You talked about the discussion within city staff with the applicant and that you had someone from the NFP liaison on board and also someone else on city staff more familiar with stormwater management. Did they have any inputs as to the true necessity of a retention basin to the northeast in the buffer zone versus other locations? Did you hear any input from them in that process?
Yes, something he did talk about is, the location of it, where between the elevations, or if it was somewhere else, maybe that doesn't work for flows, or you're making more distance. He was talking about distance of pipe, capacity to hold it, and knowing that this is a non-conforming site by stormwater, not by zoning, that they probably need more capacity. So he's aware they're going to need X amount upon this much, and from a technical feasibility standpoint and a maintenance standpoint, because the description about hey, it's a pond, but it looks like a bunch of plants. There's a recorded agreement to make sure you maintain that. So all of that aside, with that building, he was looking at that and thought, well, if that's for that building, that makes a lot of sense because you have the one there. And he did mention, tree removals, excavation, so the practical part. And he's always looking to make sure what is designed can line up with our standards. So in a sense, from the engineer's perspective, it looked very reasonable to him.
Other questions? All right. Well, if not, go for it. Sorry. Good
Okay.
call.
Are we allowed to discuss whether there's an open enforcement issue violation on that portion of the buffer?
Sure, and there's not an open enforcement case right now.
Okay, thanks.
And if I make one suggestion to Mr. Curtis's comments, in absence of knowing what we could put in a condition, I don't know if part of the record may reflect, can the commission consider, because it is the commission made all the previous conditions, so in theory they can make the new ones. I think if I'm hearing your concerns right, it's that, hey, we want something to make sure, at least is it in the language to say that there is a vegetative cover to actually achieve that intent for the screening. And I think if you don't make a hard condition now, you could at least recommend that the planning or the city commission evaluate that when it reaches them.
Just so everyone, what it says right now is there shall be a 132-foot wide natural buffer area along the easterly property line. So that is the definition. Any other questions? All right, well, to start discussion, we'll take a motion to recommend approval to the City Commission. Hang on. To approve the amendment to the Friendship Village PUD with the, I'll include the condition, I guess we'll do that and we'll see where the motion goes. So I need a motion to recommend approval to the Planning Commission or to the City Commission and take it from there.
I move we recommended the City Commission amendment to the PUD. With I believe there was a staff recommendation for the stormwater drainage.
So the recommendation from staff was to remove the northerly, for the city commission to remove the northerly 225 feet of the buffer easement to permit the future stormwater basin as shown on the PUD plan.
Okay, with that.
With that motion?
With
okay.
that motion.
So we have that motion. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, motion by Patelko, second by Tolbert. All right.
Well, I think we've heard both a very, very compelling case that Friendship Village needs to both update and expand. We know that there's need for senior housing in this community, housing in general. But, we've heard a lot of concerns from the neighbors. Some, maybe not, which are concerning, but I don't necessarily, again, think fall under the purview of this board. Certain things seem a little hostile or weird, like signs in front of gates. But at the end of the day, what they've got are, a proposal with a large vegetative barrier that already exists. I think if we, as Commissioner Curtis suggested, consider a motion in which we recommend that remain intact. And I think we've also heard some very real concerns about the stormwater handling capacity as it is. And so as much as we're talking about making sure we preserve a certain part of the buffer, I think it is also important that the development have the capacity to handle additional stormwater. It's something we're seeing not just here, but all over the city. And so I think management of drainage is incredibly important. And I think the residents' comments about their already existing problems mean that Friendship Village very much needs to expand their stormwater handling capacity.
Other initial comments?
In general, I am very much in agreement with the motion and the points laid out. I'm wondering, because I want to make sure that we're being precise with our language, with our recommendation. The staff recommended condition of approval is to remove the northern 225 feet of the buffer zone. In our discussions earlier with the applicant, I can't remember if a question was raised or if it was volunteered, that there still could be some sort of screening in that 225 feet of the eastern border and still have a stormwater basin there. It may not be a full 132 feet of wooded area, but it could be a line of tall trees, or it could be a hedge or something like that, where that could fall under the definition of a buffer. Because there would be a basin there, there would be no development there. My question then becomes, do we need to remove the definition of the buffer from that 225 feet? If we can have screening, if we can have no development, do we need to have the amendment to remove the buffer? So the question to us and also to city staff or the applicant, if anything that I said sounds out of line with what the understood situation would be.
So in other words, what you're saying is instead of removing the 225 feet, perhaps refining the definition to include a stormwater basin.
That the buffer could include a stormwater basin, but it has to include screening, which would allow the buffer to extend up to 225 feet and guarantee protections for the southern thousands of feet, while also not requiring a elimination of the buffer as a recommendation to city staff or to city commission.
Okay. Any thoughts? Well, go ahead if you want to speak to that.
I think that's a good thought. What triggers that thought is that photograph of what the current basin is. When you're out there, you wouldn't know that's a basin. It looks natural. And with those basins like that, the recorded maintenance agreement, make sure it's as you said, the retention basin for all purposes could look natural. So I see what you're saying. So if the buffer language allows stormwater basin within it and it's replicates the one that exists, looks very natural and serves that double purpose of providing ecologically sensitive and screens through the growth that's there, or the landscaping that's on the approved site plans, then yes, I think you could put it in. I think the feasibility issue is right now what type of basin detention, whatever that's going to be, the size, the volume is not known. But sitting here right now, I think if the change is that some of the basin could be in the buffer, I think that's an achievable option as well. Because I think the option is we're not doing site plan review. If they need a pond of so much surface area and they need to move it to the south and remove now 20% more trees, that is a PUD amendment.
Other thoughts on this?
Just some potential language if we wanted to do a friendly amendment to the motion, that the proper to have the condition read something like, and I didn't actually write it down, so we'll see how it goes, that the property owner amend the existing buffer easement to allow a future stormwater basin. Just get rid of the removing the buffer language. Or sorry, removing the 200, eliminating, striking, remove the northern 225 feet to permit.
My only concern with all of this is that by phrasing it in such a way, we could be opening up the entire buffer area to stormwater basins. And if we look, do you have the aerial photo? Can you?
I can get it up.
If you look at the aerial photo, the area we're talking about really doesn't have that much trees, whereas the rest of it has a ton of trees. And so that's where I would like to maintain that 225-foot reference if we continue in this train of thought.
I guess I struggle to see, I don't want to say I struggle to see the issue there, but I see the point of potentially opening up the interpretation to being anything within the buffer could be a stormwater basin. I definitely understand that that could be a valid interpretation. That's why I wanted to include the language of a visual screen as well, where it's kind of trying to find a way to have your cake and eat it too and make everybody happy a little bit. It sounds like the neighbors want a visual screen and the applicant wants to be able to have a stormwater basin somewhere in the buffer area of some size, and we don't want to have to nail them down into that too much, where if we open up the language in some ways and close it off in other ways, I feel like we could have a buffer that features a natural vegetative visual screen and also opens up the possibility of stormwater basins. And since the NFP sounds like we're well within regulations for removing trees and stuff, if they were to do that in the future, they wouldn't run into an NFP issue. I feel like what you brought up might also be more of a pro than a con, that it has a little bit more interpretability, because as long as there's the condition in it that it has a visual screen, there's no harm done as far as I can tell.
There potentially is a pretty big difference between like 5 foot of screening and 132 feet of screening. So I think the concern about opening up the entire buffer zone to the potential for a retention area is probably something that we should be intentional about in thinking about the language. So is it the case right now that with the current recommended language, there would still be a requirement in that even if we remove the northernmost 225 feet, there is a requirement that there is screening, or we're just going off of what they're showing on the plan that they intend to provide screening?
Correct. The screening would apply regardless in two ways, because the zoning ordinance requires it. It wouldn't be 132 feet wide. And part 2 is the approved site plan for the garden homes probably has a detailed planting plan. I have that material, I just haven't zeroed in on that, and this discussion has triggered it. So the answer to your question is yes, and whatever was shown there is growing there now. We can certainly follow up on that to say, hey, what was planted there in '07 on the site plan, is it still there? And then regardless of, between the approved site plan, the PUD, and the current ordinance, there would still have to be screening in that vicinity and arguably within the strip if it was missing.
So screening's already required?
Correct.
So maybe we don't need to add language about screening.
Okay, yeah, I was not under the impression that screening was required by any existing code or language. So as long as it's still required, then I think we're good.
And maybe we could only allow the basin within the 225 feet.
And I believe in the developer statement, I believe they do reference that fact of the pond, but they will still adhere to the city screening requirements.
That's good to know, because the way it's depicted on the plan that we were given is that the dark green of the trees stops at that 225 feet, and then it is exposed to neighbors' backyards for that northern 225 feet. So,
oh, that is a great question, or a good point. The way I would look at this, and it's shown on the 1997 PUD plan, if the building came in or there was some proposal to, now we're working off of a generality, but if it looked like some of the trees to the south were being removed outside of the buffer, beyond that, that would be a PUD thing, because it shows it as wood cover. It seems pretty obvious that at least is a wood cover. So I think even staff working with this, if it was, hey, we want to remove 50% of the trees and put in, outside of the buffer, put in a flower garden, well, we'd still evaluate it to the current ordinance. And I think a stopgap would be, hey, wait a second, you got this big patch of forest here on your PUD plan. This is out of alignment with the PUD plan. Where the part you're referencing is, well, screening's still required even if it isn't shown as a set of trees there.
okay, as long as there would still be a requirement, that I'm comfortable with that.
It would be screening per the city's existing screening ordinances and all
Correct.
those things, yeah, okay.
And there's options. It's either a fence, a berm, a planting with trees of a certain size, space so much. So, and applicants can always exceed the minimum if they so prefer.
So then to kind of summarize, it brings us back to the proposed amendment to the amendment that Christina brought up, where it would be almost just refining the definition of buffer to include stormwater retention basins, but only in the northern 225 feet of the buffered area as laid out in the previous PUD plan. Now, to go about implementing that, do I need to make a motion to amend the amendment?
Yes.
All right, I would like to make a motion to amend the condition of the approval to read that the property owner shall amend the existing buffer easement to allow for stormwater retention basins within the northern 225 feet to permit the future basin as shown in the PUD plan.
I believe Mr. Patelko has to second that, if he wants to.
I mean, in some ways, it seems like it's overcomplicating it, but, or is it all right, I'll second the motion.
All right, we've just.
At this point, we have an amendment to amend an amendment. It does require a second. Didn't necessarily have to.
Okay, sorry.
But he certainly can.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot then.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we have this proposed amendment, discussion on this proposed amendment. I mean, I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Doing this just maintains the buffer, but adds the language of the storm basin. Not doing it reduces the buffer, but the PUD plan shows the storm basin. So it's kind of which way do we want to go with this? That's sort of the way I skin this.
And the reason I proposed the change to the wording is simply the amendment as proposed by the city staff is including the removing of the buffer, which feels like a larger than necessary change to the original PUD agreement and the buffer as it was laid out, when an amendment would serve the same purpose without having to remove it. That's what it comes down to me.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. No, that tracks.
Other thoughts?
I agree with all that. I think someone read the language that's currently in the easement that basically just defines the buffer as a natural buffer. And so I don't know that I have an opinion one way or the other, but if City Commission is going to be amending the existing agreement anyway, do we desire to have more definition about what the buffer should be, and do we want to make a recommendation to City Commission in that regard?
Let's put a pin in that question, and let's wrap up this question of the storm pond, because that's a good one. I think that's a good one. Okay. Any other discussion on the amended motion? Okay, so to restate, we have an amendment to the motion to state that basically instead of amending the buffer to reduce it by 225 feet, we're going to basically allow a stormwater basin to exist within the northern 225 feet of the buffer strip. Yeah, is that fair to say? Okay. All good? All right. Do we need a roll call vote or just a voice vote?
I'd have a roll call.
Roll call vote, please.
All right. Audette Bauman,
Yes.
Chambers, Curtis,
Yes.
DeCenzo,
Yes.
Milliken,
Yes.
Patalco,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Tolber.
Yes.
Okay, now, restate your question again.
So my question was, I think someone read the definition that is currently in the easement, and it does not really put a lot of guardrails around what that buffer needs to be, and it seems like a lot of the feedback from neighbors is driven by concern about what potentially could happen in that buffer. And so the question is, do we desire to make some kind of recommendation to City Commission that they should look at that when they are, already making changes to the existing easement?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a good question, it's a good discussion, good recommendation. We've had a vote to amend the motion, and that was approved, so I think you have to go back and vote on the original motion now. We're proceeding on to.
But this is discussion on that motion.
Okay.
Is it not? I would say it is. Or am I way out of?
You can proceed. We've got some flexibility here.
Okay. All right.
So we recognize we've got to vote on the
Yes.
Motion. The motion's been amended now, so as amended, that has become the motion.
Yep. And then we'll continue discussion now on that amended motion. All right. Thoughts on the question?
I am in agreement with you that like the language is vague, but I feel like the language that is there about a natural buffer in combination with the existing zoning requirements that we just heard about there being screening, to me feels like enough where like I don't see a way around the intended purpose of that. And due to the fact that it would require an amendment to an already amended motion, I don't see a full necessity to it. But the fact that it's in the record and that we've discussed it and the city commission will have that as part of their information, I feel like would probably be sufficient at this time unless someone else has arguments otherwise.
Other thoughts?
I feel like it may be sufficient as it's going through the NFB board, and there's language here that says any impacts to the established natural features will be replaced and restored, and then there's language around a greater number of trees will be planted to replace the ones that were taken down. I feel like we may have good coverage.
Was there something specific that you were thinking of when you asked your question?
Nope, just wanted to make sure that the prior kind of discussion around the lack of clarity and definition of what that buffer should entail, along with the concerns that we heard from neighbors, that we at least make sure we're all good with what exists and going forward with that.
And a motion, we've got an amended condition to the motion. Any other discussion?
Just stepping back a bit on the project as a whole, I think it's great to be adding units of housing of any kind, and especially specifically to this population. I think that's great. And the integrated trail system is lovely. And I think they've done a good job of reflecting the master plan and the criteria in the PUD review. Thanks.
Other thoughts? From where we sit, what we're asked to do today, as an amendment to a 50-year-old PUD, I don't believe the changes that are presented here are going to fundamentally change the nature of the use and what is existing there today. I think we've heard some concerns about the interactions and how it plays in the sandbox, but those are sort of outside of what we're talking about here as an amendment to the PUD. So I hope that they will continue to engage with neighbors and work to improve those relationships and some of those issues. But otherwise, this meets the master plan and this meets the standards of the zoning ordinance. And, I look forward to seeing how this progresses through the site plan process. So seeing no one else jumping, as a reminder, we have a recommendation to the Planning Commission to approve the amended Friendship Village PUD with the amended condition to allow the stormwater basin within the northerly 220 feet of the existing 132-foot buffer on the eastern property line. Did I state all that correctly? Okay, so that was moved, seconded, amended, etc. We're ready for roll call.
Audette Baumann,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
DeCenzo,
Yes.
Milliken,
Yes.
Patelko,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Tolber.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and your comments. And yes, thank you. Staff, thanks as well. Okay, moving on. City planner reports.
Good evening. So, very quickly, you all will be getting communication from the planning department shortly about Imagine Kalamazoo 2035. So it is time now to kick off our master plan process, and we are organizing ourselves to do that later this summer. We would like to have a representative from this board, as well as a number of other boards, to serve on our master plan partner list. It's kind of like a working group. I don't need people to throw their name in the hat right now, but I do want you to be thinking about it, because I am going to be asking over email for you guys to think about it and nominate yourself, or if nobody answers, I will voluntold somebody. So be prepared. So the working group, what that means is that you'll meet with us every other month when we kick off our meetings, which we hope to do later this summer. You will agree to read a book with us and have a discussion. We're going to be reading Happy City by Charles Montgomery. We're going to be doing actually a larger community read with this book, but we're going to definitely ask our working group to participate in this activity. We will be asking you to review feedback as we get it from the community. Did we hear everything? Are we missing information? What direction would you like to go? So kind of a check to staff. Partners or working group members will also be asked to host a small meeting of their own. We did this back in 2025. We called them meetings on the go, and we come up with a little packet, a little toolkit for everybody to ask questions of your family, your coworkers, your running club, your knitting circle, whatever it is that you do that you want to have this community discussion in. We will be asking partners to host one of those as well. So those are the general responsibilities. Every other month meeting starting late summer, at least for 12 months, possibly up to 18 months process, depending on how it goes. So I'll have a lot more information on Imagine Kalamazoo 2035 at our August meeting, but I did want to plant the seeds tonight about needing a volunteer to serve for the next 18 months, let's just say that, to be safe on the partners group. So thanks. And that is all I have for you this evening.
Thank you. Any questions or any questions on the site plan review list? No? All right. If not, we've entered the time for public comments. A reminder, this is time for you to come up and address anything not on the agenda. So if anyone would like to come forward and speak, you may do so. Again, 3 minutes. Please give your name and address. And if you're online and you would like to speak about anything not on the agenda, you may do so by calling in now at 888-382-9556. So, anyone have any public comments? Seeing no one in the audience, is there anyone online?
There are no online calls.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Pradel.
Good evening, everyone. Nice job on a fruitful conversation tonight and discussion. It's always nice to see that, so thank you. Wanted to update you on a couple items from City Commission I thought were worth sharing tonight. First one was from our June 17th meeting. We accepted a grant just under about $500,000. It's called the Community-Based Crisis Grant. Why this is particularly special is what this does is it allows KDPS to partner with ISK mental health professionals. And so in 1 year's time, 38% of calls were considered behavioral health type related calls with KDPS. Pretty large number. And so currently there's one person that was working part-time between 16 to 24 hours in a given week. This will enable funding to have 2 full-time people to be able to go in concert and work as a co-response model to help and also provide crisis intervention training for our public safety team. So that was a big win for the city of Kalamazoo. I was really proud to see that work. Wanted to make sure to lift that up and share that with everyone. Then the other big one from our last meeting on July 1st, we did the first reading of an ordinance amendment to Chapter 36, which is our traffic code area. And it involves overnight parking, meter rates, and operational hours of meters for downtown Kalamazoo parking. This is a pretty major overhaul for the parking system in downtown Kalamazoo. So I wanted to share a couple just major updates to what's being recommended that we'll be considering at our July 15th meeting. So the first one, meters on the Kalamazoo Mall. These will be non-coin operated, more technologically advanced meters that you'd see in a big city on the Kalamazoo Mall. Residential overnight parking. So this would include overnight street permit parking. But also the other thing that's kind of nice is for people who have monthly passes, basically for downtown, it would provide like 5 guest passes per month to those individuals as well. Adjustments to the pricing and timing of downtown parking. So what's proposed is kind of an 8-to-8 model in most areas. And then also kind of a flat rate type parking structure as well. I mentioned the non-coin operated meter technology. And then some things that we've already implemented. In February, we hired a new manager of parking. And then also last November, we are offering 90 minutes of free parking in our 2 parking structures as well. So this is pretty big changes to downtown Kalamazoo. So far, the response from business owners has been actually pretty positive. You would think when you hear, oh gosh, they're going to stick meters on the Kalamazoo Mall that it's going to hurt business. But actually their rationale is that it provides business churn. So instead of somebody, plopping down in a 90-minute free parking, and then maybe overstaying themselves half an hour or 45 minutes, it's going to encourage people to churn through a little bit faster so they can get more customers in their doors. So far, they've been pretty positive about it. I also wanted to just make sure to continue to thank you all and other residents of the city of Kalamazoo and people who visit for their patience during construction season. It is probably felt overwhelming as you drive around, but I assure you it is because it is overwhelming. It is a record year in terms of investment that we have in our city, and we're not even done with everything that we're planning. So thank you for everybody's patience. We're building a community for the future, and in that process, we're taking advantage of all these grants and timing and funding to get a lot of work done in infrastructure. So thank you so much for your patience with that. And again, have a great night. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Planning Commissioner comments. Any comments from Planning Commissioners? Going? Anyone? No one? We're all commented out. Well, great discussion tonight on a very complicated issue, one of the most complicated in my tenure, just from a technical zoning, layer upon layer issue. So it was a very good discussion. I encourage us to continue that level of dialogue and discussion going forward. So great job. Welcome to all of our new members again. Thank you for joining on and being a part of this. And have a great July. So with that, our agenda is exhausted and we're adjourned. Thanks.